Good morning. We'd like to welcome you to another edition of the Sunday School Review. This week's Sunday School lesson is entitled The Boy Jesus in the Temple. And it's taken from Luke, the second chapter, verses 41 through 52. And in our lesson today, we have three outlines. The first outline is Jesus went missing, and that's verses 41 through 45. And the second outline is verses 46 through 50, and it's entitled Jesus Was Found. And the third outline is Jesus Went Home, and that's verses 51 and 52. Okay, let's begin our lesson with our first outline. Jesus went missing. Now, let's give you a little bit of background about this lesson here. Now, it is taken from Luke, as I said, and we are now in the New Testament. We were in the Old Testament in Genesis for a while, and we were talking about sacrifices there. And now we are talking about things that happen at the temple. Now, Luke is the only gospel writer that records the youth of Jesus in his youth. And as a matter of fact, Luke he was a physician. He was, we call him the physician. Now, Luke's gospel was very well researched. Luke's gospel is very detailed. And Luke's gospel talks about his birth, and as I said, and he talks about his being dedicated in the temple on the 8th day, according to the law. And it also talks about his childhood. Again, he is the only gospel writer that records anything about Jesus' youth. Okay, now let's look. We're gonna talk more about his the background later as we go through our lesson. But let's just jump right into our first outline here, and we're going to read. Let's start by reading verses 41 and 42, and it's under the heading Jesus went missing. And let's read. Actually, our lesson starts again at verse 41, but I want to start with verse 40. Read verse 40 before we get to our lesson, which is, as I said, which is in 40, starts in 41. Okay, that is the second chapter of Luke. That's where our lesson is taken from. Again, it starts at verse 41. Let's go there. So we're going to read verse 40. And the child grew and waxed strong in spirit, filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him. This is talking about Jesus, because as I said, this is in the second chapter of Luke. And again, Luke is the only author in the New Testament that records details about Jesus' youth. Now, other gospels write about his birth and all of that, but Luke is the only one that records anything about his youth. So verse 40 said, the child grew, which is Jesus. Jesus grew. In other words, he grew just like a normal child. Okay, he learned to crawl and eventually learned to walk and run and all of these things. He grew up just like a normal child. But now we know, because we don't have time to go into all of that, the history about it, but we know that Jesus was both the Son of God and the Son of Man. Okay, and we're going to get to some of that in the lesson, but he was fully God and fully man. So obviously he grew up just like a normal child. That was the human side of him. Just like any other child, learn to crawl, walk, things of that nature as a child. But he was all man and he was all God. That's enough for that. Let's get into our lesson a little bit here. Okay, and let's read verse 41, which is where our lesson starts. We're going to do 41 and 42 right now. It says, now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. Now it says his parents. Now we know his parents, let's say earthly parents, were both Joseph and Mary. Mary was his mother. So, but Joseph was not his biological father, but he was referred to as his social father. Just like if you adopt a child, and well, that's not my biological child, but that is your child because you have adopted that child, and you are now their parents. Okay, is well, you're not their parent. Yeah, you are. You are their social parents. You are their parents. So yes, his parents, that is Joseph and Mary. His parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. They celebrated that at the temple in Jerusalem. Now, this certifies that both his parents were devout Jews. They were devout Jews. They were obedient to the law. It says every year. Now, all Jewish males were required to attend at least three festivals, three major festivals. Okay, now we're gonna cover two here today, but they went there every year at the feast of the Passover. They celebrated Passover, which was the major feast. And we know the Passover was the feast that celebrated their deliverance from Egypt and where they were they were required to kill a lamb and put the blood over the doorpost. So when the death angel came, they would pass over them. That's the whole idea. So that's one of the major feasts. That is the most important feast, and it is the feast of the Passover, which is a one-day feast. Okay, so that's what they did. They were devout parents, and they were obedient to the law. Now, probably not every Jewish male attended every feast, but it shows that they did. Jesus' parents did. That is Joseph and Mary. Okay, let's go to verse 42. And when he was 12 years old, they went up to Jerusalem after the custom of the feast. Now, this time, when Jesus accompanied his parents to the feast, he was age 12. Now, age 12 was an important year or transitional year because there were serious teachings that a 12-year-old, because they was going to be 13, obviously, and at that time they were considered to be not full grown, but they was considered to take on manly responsibilities, and they were considered at that point to be obedient to the law. Now, like at 10, 8, 9, 10, children weren't required to be obedient to the law. I mean, if they had parents that were they may have insisted that their children, be observant of the law, but it was not, say, a requirement. But at age 13, which Jesus was 12, and this was a pivotal year for him. Okay, so there were some serious teachings because at 13, the males were expected to be obedient to the law. That is Jewish males. Okay, so and they went up to Jerusalem after the custom of the feast. Now, okay, so that what was going on, and this is what this whole outline is Jesus went missing, but observing the Passover. So his parents observed the Passover every year, and no doubt, I'm not Jesus probably attended every year. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But clearly, he attended this year at age 12. Now, okay, the next verse is starting home. So they attended the feast. Let's read 43. When they had fulfilled the days, as they returned, the child Jesus tarried behind in Jerusalem, and Joseph and his mother knew not of them. Now, if you, well, Luke still could have said his parents, because Joseph again was considered his earthly parent or his social parent, social father. Okay, we know Mary was his mother, but Joseph was not his biological father, but he was his social father. Okay. And now, okay, so they fulfilled the days of the feast, which was, as I said, was the Passover, which was one day, and on the heels of the Passover was the feast of unleavened bread, which was 7 days. So we got a total of 8 days, the two feasts combined. That is the Passover one day and the Feast of Unleavened Bread 7 days. So they fulfilled that. So they were there the whole time. Again, as I said, Passover was the most important one, but they attended both feasts, which was a total of 8 days, and they started home. Okay, it says, and Jesus tarried behind in Jerusalem. Joseph and his mother knew not of it. They was not aware because and the reason that they generally travel in groups, large groups, for protection and things of that sort because they for protection from robbers or whatever, and so generally speaking, the children and women were in the front, and the men brought up the rear. So at 12 years old, Jesus could have been in either group. That is, he could have been in the group with the women and children, because he was, as I say, in that transitional age, or he could have been in the group with the men. He was 12. Okay. So they didn't realize, let's go to the next two verses, 44 and 45, where they were searching for the boy. So you might think, well, didn't they realize when they left that Jesus wasn't there? And that's why, because there was groups, and Jesus could have been in the group with the women and children because of his age, or he could have been in the group with the men because of his age. So he could have been in either group, and it was a large group. It wasn't just a small group, a handful of people. And that's where they traveled. Now, let's read verse 44. But they supposing him to have been in the company. They thought he was in the group. They thought he was there. As I said, maybe he was in the group with the women and children, or he's in the men's group. So they just thought he was there. Okay, they went a day's journey. That is, now it says it was about a, depending on the way that they went, it was about 50 to 90 miles. The journey was about 50, I think the lesson said 50 to 90 miles, depending upon which direction they travel. Okay, so they went a day's journey, which about a day's journey is about 15 to 20 miles. Okay, so they was headed back home. They went a day's journey, about 15 to 20 miles, and then they was looking for, well, where's Jesus? We haven't seen him. We haven't seen him since we left. We saw him maybe, and maybe they didn't have vigil on him the whole time they was at the feast anyway. Because, as again, that was a pivotal year, and he in other words, he probably wasn't under their coattail the whole 8 days anyway. But they just assumed, because that probably was a custom. It wasn't their first rodeo. They said, well, he's probably with one of the groups, and they so after a day's journey, about 15 or 20 miles, they said, well, where's Jesus? Have anybody seen him? No, I haven't seen him. And they searched for him among the kinfolks and acquaintance, and then 45 says, and they found him not. They didn't see him. He wasn't anywhere to be found, basically. Okay, so they turned back again to go to Jerusalem and sought him. So again, the winter day's journey, 15 to 20 miles, so they had to go back another 15 to 20 miles. So that took another day. That's 2 days, right? Okay. And they began seeking for him. That's 45. And the next outline is Jesus was found. So they went a day's journey, 15 to 20 miles, then they went back. That's another day's journey, 2 days. They searched for him. Okay, let's read 46. And it came to pass that after 3 days, they found him in the temple. So now it says it was at that time, they said a number of people in the court that in Jerusalem at that time was about, I believe it says 2.5 million people. Okay, you can just imagine. Now, some of them probably went home and all that by that time. It probably wasn't that many at that time. But so it was a lot of people there, and that gives the reason why they probably hadn't seen Jesus many times during that whole ordeal. But so they go and they search for him for another day, and guess why they find him? And 3 days they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of doctors, both hearing them and asking them questions. So he was basically found in the temple court. Now, at that time, as I said, this was one of the major festivals, and experts in the law was there. It was just like we have a major convention. In other words, the foremost experts in the law were there. All the rabbis and experts in the law was there. Okay, discussing topics, and probably in one of the topics that were discussed, among others, was the coming Messiah. And these experts in the law, that's where they gathered to discuss issues of the law and truth. That's why they gathered in the temple court, and that's where they found Jesus there, in the midst of doctors, both hearing them and asking them questions, asking them probing questions. When it said doctors, that is experts in the law, doctors of the law. Okay, and verse 47. This is still under the heading Jesus was found. And verse 47 says, and all that heard him, all, it was probably a crowd of people around. I mean, as they were discussing, and all that heard him were astonished at his understanding and answers. Now, let's look at this here. Let's look at this verse here. All that heard him was amazed, was astonished at his understanding and answers. Now, I read before we began our lesson, I read verse 40. I'll listen again, start at 41. I read verse 40. And verse 40, back again to Luke, the second chapter, verse 40, it says, and the child grew, that is, Jesus grew from a baby, from a toddler on through. Now he's 12. The child grew. He basically, like a normal child, grew up from, like however tall he was, a foot tall and XYZ. So he grew up a normal child. He waxed strong in spirit, filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him. This is as Jesus grew. Now he's 12. And this is a display of his understanding, how it has advanced to at this point at 12. And let's go back to our verse 47. And all that heard him was astonished at his understanding and answers. It did not say they was astonished at his youth. I mean, yeah, they knew he was, well, this is just a young boy. They knew he wasn't an adult. They knew he wasn't 30 years old. Well, this boy's not 30. But they was not so much astonished at his youth, but they was astonished at his understanding and his answers, and his probing questions. That's what astonished them. How basically, and they didn't say, and they didn't even mention youth here. They were so astonished that he understood what he understood. They was more astonished at his understanding and his answers than his youth. They saw he was young, obviously, but that's not what astonished them. That's not what was so amazing. What was so amazing was that his understanding. How is someone this young has this amount of understanding? How is it possible? And we read in 40 how he grew in wisdom and understanding, how he grew, how his wisdom grew. And we see it on display here at age 12. We see the evidence here of this scripture. We see the evidence here where we see it. So now let's go to our next unit. Anxious answers, that's verse 48. And said, now this is under when they found Jesus. And verse 48 says, when they saw him, they were amazed. And his mother said unto him, son, why hast thou dealt with us? Behold, thy father and I have sought thee sorry. Now, and he said thy father. They said that father, and it's okay if they said that. If let's look at Luke, the 26th chapter, the 26th verse in chapter 1. Okay, Luke, the first chapter, verse 26 and verse 27, and this is talking about Jesus. 26 says, in the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent from God unto the city of Galilee named Nazareth to a virgin espoused to a man whose name was Joseph. That's the Joseph we're talking about here. Joseph, of the house of David, and the virgin name was Mary. Now, so we see now Jesus, David was a true descendant of David. Joseph, Jesus' biological father, not biological father, Jesus' social father was, or earthly father, was a true descendant of David. Said Joseph of the house of David. So Jesus was a true Joseph, I'm sorry, was a true descendant of David. Okay, he was a descendant of David. And also in Matthew, the 18th chapter, we go to Matthew, the 18th chapter. No, Matthew, the first chapter, the 18th verse. Matthew, let's go to Matthew, the first chapter, and we're going to look at the 18th verse, a couple of verses there. First chapter of Matthew, the 18th verse, and the deal there is 18 through 21. We probably won't read all of those, but let's start at the 18. This is Matthew's account. Now, the birth of Jesus Christ was on this wise. They read this and during the Christmas time and all that. Okay. When as his mother Mary was espoused to Joseph, before they came together, she was found with child. Then Joseph, her husband, this is verse 19 of Matthew 1. Then Joseph, her father, being a just man and not willing to make her a public example, was minded to put her away privately. Okay, in verse 20, but while he thought on these things, that is Joseph, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared unto him, had a dream, in a dream saying, Joseph, thy son of David. So again, that showed that Joseph, that is Jesus' earthly father, was a true descendant of David. Okay, the son of David, fear not to take unto thee Mary, thy wife, for which is conceived of her is of the Holy Ghost, and he shall bring forth a son, and I call his name Jesus. Now, so basically, as I said, now it's okay. So Joseph knew, we know that I'm not his biological father. Mary knew that, Joseph knew that. Okay, we knew that. We get that idea. But Joseph was his social father. Okay, social father. It says, why hast thou dealt with us? Thy father and I have sought thee sorry. Okay. Now, and again, Jesus is 12. Remember, Jesus is 12. Now, Jesus is 12, and the question becomes here at age 12, we can see clearly, we'll see clearly in this lesson that Jesus knows his true identity. Now, at 3 years old, I mean, we don't have any record of anything that happened back there anyway, okay? But if at 3 years old, or when he started talking, Jesus probably didn't have the knowledge that he was the Son of Man and the Son of God. But now we can see clearly, as 40 we read in verse 2 and 4 of Luke, how he grew in wisdom and the spirit. So now he's reached the age, he's clearly reached the point that I really know who I am. I know who I am now. I really know who I am. And this is a display. Okay, so he knows who he is. He know who he is. He know who he is and his purpose. Like I said, at 3 years old, well, what's your purpose? He probably couldn't answer anything. I guess he was talking, but at 3, but he couldn't answer. Yeah, I got to be about my father's business. No, no. We see in 40 he grew in wisdom and spirit. So to the point now, at age 12, clearly he knows who he is and what his purpose is. Okay. Now, verse 49, the answer, Jesus responds to his mother when she questioned him, why have you dealt with us this way? And this is the answer Jesus gives. Jesus responds to his mother's question. And then he said unto them, how is it that ye sought me? Wist ye not that I must be about my father's business? Now, again, clearly, he's not talking about Joseph, because obviously he probably Joseph was a carpenter, and Jesus being the oldest of the children, so that Jesus has other brothers and sisters too. Okay, so Jesus being the oldest, he probably helped his father. He learned the trade of carpentry from his father, that is earthly father, that is Joseph. Okay, but when he said, I must be about my father's business, we know that he was not talking about his earthly father, that is Joseph, but he was talking about his father's business. He was talking about the business of why I was sent here. I'm the Son of Man and the Son of God. So he clearly recognized, I must be about my father's business. Okay, that's what he realized. He clearly understood his true identity at this point. Now you may say, well, what about at 9 or 10? Well, we don't know. But we know clearly at this age, at age 12 here, he clearly understands his identity of who he is and what he was called to do. Again, he was talking about his father's business, not the business of Joseph, his earthly father. And let's go to verse 40. And they understood not the saying which he spoke unto them. So even though the angel spoke to both, that is Mary, his mother, and Joseph, his earthly father, about that, and they knew that he was a special child. They knew he was special. But I mean, it's not like, well, okay, we're gonna make this special. I mean, I don't believe they made any special accommodations for him that they didn't make for the other children. But they knew that he was a special child, and they probably could understand. But they still was astonished when we read it, when they saw him in the temple discussing with the experts in the law. They was astonished. I mean, they were astonished. They was astonished as well. They says verse 48. We read it, and when they saw him, that is, uh, when they laid eyes on, that is, his parents, his earthly parent, Mary, his mother, and Joseph, his father, his earthly father, when they were amazed. They were amazed. They too were amazed. But they had some idea that he had a special mission. But his parents didn't fully understand his divine mission. They didn't fully understood it, because it says they understood not the saying. So, okay. Well, we don't fully understand. We know that you're a special child and things of that sort. We know what the angel said, but we still don't understand fully your divine mission. Okay. But they didn't fully understand, but Jesus did. That's the take on this. They didn't fully understand his divine mission, but at 12, that's the key. At 12, Jesus understood his divine mission. At this point, when did he understand it? Before 12, we don't know exactly, but we can see here at 12, Jesus fully understands his divine mission, but his parents did not. That's the crust of it. At 12, he understood, Jesus understood that I am the Son of God. I am the Son of God. As I said, he's the Son of Man and the Son of God. Jesus fully understood that I am the Son of God. I fully understand my mission. Maybe you don't, but I do. Okay. Now, and the third outline is Jesus went home. Jesus went home. Okay. Now, Jesus was 12. He wasn't 30. Jesus did not rebel against his parents. I mean, it's not like Jesus told Joseph, well, Joseph, you ain't my father. I mean, something. No, he didn't rebel against his parents. He was obedient. He was obedient. It says, and he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was subject unto them. And the scripture clearly it's one of the tenets of the law. Obey your parents. So they were still his parents. He's only 12. Okay, he said, I'm leaving home. I'm not obeying you guys anymore because I know my mission. I'm on my own. No, Jesus was obedient to his earthly parents. I know my mission. I know I am. I know my divine mission, but I'm going to be obedient to my earthly parents. And it said, and it was subject to them. And from that point, we don't see for 18 years is the scriptures absent about what Jesus was doing. From 12 to 18. 12 to 18. It's absent. So Jesus was obedient. He went home and he was obedient. He honored his parents, which is the scripture and Exodus 20:12. Obey your parents that the days may be long upon this earth. So obedient to parents, and he was obedient to his parents. And 51b, we read 51a, 51b, but his mother kept all these saying in our heart. Okay. So the fact is this, is that God knew what he was doing. God placed Jesus in their care. Because basically, as I said, he was born a baby, toddler. Who's going to raise him? He didn't raise himself. So God chose the parents. God chose the parents. God chose Joseph, okay, and Mary to raise him. Basically, he put them in their care. Okay? He put them in their care. Okay. So the thing is that Jesus did not reject his family. Okay. And this is the thing. At 12, he said, I must be about my father's business. Now he didn't say, well, I'm abandoning you guys. I got God work to do. No, I mean, you can't. In other words, the whole idea, you can't, in the name of doing God's work, okay, neglect to be obedient to your parents and take care of your parents. Okay, that's is what is required. And Jesus did not do this. At 12, he fully understood his divine mission, but he was obedient to his earthly parent because God placed him under their care. God didn't choose anybody to place him with. Okay. So let's go to our we had our last slide. Let's go to our last verse here, talking about his growth, and this is after the temple experience. This is after the temple experience, verse 52. And Jesus increased in other words, he increased more in wisdom, even more in wisdom and stature, and in the favor of God and man. Okay, so the next 18 years, as I said, of Jesus' life, he increased in wisdom and stature and in the favor of God and with man. So that's our lesson. It gives us a glimpse at Jesus' life as a youngster, at Jesus' life at the age of 12. Again, where Jesus understands that his mission, that Jesus was fully God and fully human. He was the Son of God and the Son of Man. Jesus, maybe at this point, as I said, they didn't understand Jesus' mission, a divine mission, but at 12, he did. But he was obedient and he continued to grow in wisdom and statute and in the favor of God. And again, we didn't hear anything about Jesus for the next 18 years. And that's our lesson today. We'd like to thank you for watching. We ask you to join us next week for another edition of the Sunday School Review. Thank you.